I'm Professor Alex DeRijke. I'm an architect with dRMM, that's DeRijke Marsh Morgan Architects in London, and a professor at the Royal College of Arts. I'm an architect because I can't really be anything else. I have a need to make things and to feel socially useful. I have a need to build. So it all turns into only one choice for me. I guess I could have been an engineer had I been better at sustained, focused calculating of performance characteristics of materials, but I'm also interested in the way in which we react to not just space and light, but materials themselves. So the phenomenology is something that I cannot divorce from the structural capacity of materials. I divided, past tense, my time between academe and practice in order to carry out research into the nature of timber, architecture and materials. However, the urge to make and to build became stronger, and it seemed also possible to carry out the research into timber architecture in the office, in dRMM. And the world of teaching is also about academic management, and I was at the dean level where that was necessary. So it became a question of time. Whilst I really like the Royal College of Art and what the students are doing, what the staff are doing, I also found that the need to practice and build and design was greater than the need to be a manager in academe. Well, I came up with the definition of, timber is the new concrete. So a while ago, when observing the similarities in precast concrete panels and, if you like, pre-laminated timber panels, and it got me thinking about the paradigms of the construction industry and the way in which techniques are replaced or superseded. The typical reading of architectural history is that it's a succession of styles and a style-based operation, really. So classical architecture is replaced by Gothic and so on. It's the other way around, but never mind. But I prefer to see or understand the history of architecture as a chronology of materials and ideas, and the style comes out of the material. So, stone works well with classical architecture, and it does with Gothic too, but on the other hand, timber architecture takes you somewhere else, It's a different operation. The buildings that were conceived of as concrete but built in timber are generally not very interesting. And you can see that happening as a mindset that is around, say, steel frame. When translated into timber, it hasn't really looked at the potential or the opportunities that the material offers, or the expression that is latent within it. So I started thinking about what lay in the future of construction, and coming across different types of engineered timber at the end of the 20th century, I became increasingly convinced that it would define the 21st century because of the carbon question, really. Environmental issues are becoming increasingly pronounced. No one is denying climate change anymore. And it won't be long before carbon is effectively a form of currency, and timber has the answer to many of these questions. Despite the enduring popularity of concrete since Roman times, and it is a wonderful material, there's no doubt about it, it is, the writing's on the wall already. It's the carbon pressure. There's a need for steel and a need for concrete, but that need is diminishing and becoming more specific. The question around which came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of material and design, is a good one. most architecture is based on form finding, and I would say that architects who start from the material in order to find the form are in a minority, but I'm certainly in that minority. I like to choose the material and extrapolate from small scale to larger scale and not design something at, say, 1 to 1,000 or even 1 to 100 and then later decide how you're going to make it. So typical departure point for a dRMM project would be, this is the way we want to go about making it, and what are the opportunities that the brief, the client and the site are offering. My advice to younger architects would be to not take advice from older architects. Oscar Wilde said that, you know, what you do with advice is pass it on. Not necessarily use it yourself, but the genuine advice I would offer would be to make things and not consider the profession to be paper or computer based, but actually the discipline of making can be learnt with your hands as much as your head. So doing time on site is actually useful. Before I got into engineered timber at a big scale, I was known as the king of plywood, or at least written up by The Guardian in the UK, because I remodeled my mother's house with my brothers and sister to save the cost of it being done by a contractor. And it was quite a radical remodeling with which we had, for which we had little money, so we used recycled plywood. So everything was made from plywood. And this is before cross-laminated timber existed, but the discipline of how you join it, how you select it, how you make structures is very similar, just at scale. So for me, the experience of directly making and detailing, making design decisions on site is actually critical in my education. And I think part of the confidence I have now in making unusual structures in engineered timber is because of that. I would like to build public buildings as a legacy. I mean, I'm not necessarily after a big legacy, but as the question is, what would you like to build as your legacy? I think a more interesting answer might be that I would rather influence the course of construction in a given culture rather than specific buildings per se. Of course, I'd love to do a library or a swimming pool or a gallery or housing, of course, but and particularly long span structures like sports facilities and the like. But I think it's more important than single buildings is to have changed the course of construction for good. So I'm very proud to have already done that, in the sense that having introduced Australia to cross-laminated timber and seeing that it's being taken up by architects who don't necessarily know the history of that connection or my role in that connection between Europe and here. But the fact that it's happening is very important to me. I'm very pleased that that's picking up now, several years later. Well, in 10 years' time, one can fully expect there to be far more variety in the kind of timber construction. I mean, already there are so many inventions for types of hollow box section floors or prefabricated timber cassette panels with insulation and cladding and windows already in them. You know, you can see a litany of inventions being carried out and delivered, and with the consequences all around us in the built environment. You can see that, but maybe it's more interesting to think about what would make that possible, which is forestry, and that managed forestry as opposed to clear cutting of old growth will mean a reversal of, or at least a slowing down perhaps, of climate change. And I think a cultural difference, which you already see in children, about just environmentally smart thinking. So I think societies 10 years' time, I mean, it might look exactly the same, but done in timber. Or it might be a society where defaults or automatic decisions are made differently. Because at the moment, it's still the automatic decision to think of buildings as being made of, say, concrete block. And I think perhaps that the big change in 10 years will be that it won't be the automatic solution anymore. I would also like to say that I would love to build a great building in Australia, of course, in timber, Australian timber.